Rachel Cruz. She's host of the Rachel Cruz Show, Smart Money Happy Hour. That's a fun one. Rachel Cruz, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
And I know you got a book right there behind you. Know Yourself, Know Your Money. This has been sort of your crusade, and your father, Dave Ramsey, as well, helping people understand what to do with their money. Look, it's crazy right now. Nobody's really certain what's going to happen. You got the market up one day, down the next. I tend to be pretty bearish in this environment, full disclosure myself. But what are you telling people? What's your sense of where we're heading?
You know, I think one of the best things people can do is just to get a simple, solid financial foundation under them to kind of weather the storm of life. Because, I mean, it has been up and down really since 2020. And you can go to the Great Recession, right? You can go back to 2008, 9, 10 as well. So life is going to be up and down. So what you can control is the income that's coming into your account and what you do with it. And so one of the best things you can do is get out of debt, have a savings of 3 to 6 months of expenses. You can put that in a money market account or a high yield savings account. Be investing 15% of your income into retirement after that. So it's kind of these more simple steps. But what I always caution people or encourage people, I should say, is to control what you can control. You can't control what the Fed's going to do. You can't control what Washington's going to do. You can't control all of that. But what are the things that you can control? So put yourself in a good financial position so that when things do come up, because they will, that you can weather the storm.
So you've got some basic principles. How does that work in terms of, people's tolerance for risk, or if you're in a certain age category? I mean, you and I probably have longer for retire. You probably have a longer time until you retire than me. But if you have that kind of time horizon versus if you don't, do you tell people to break it down that way if they're putting a certain amount into the equity, into the stock market each month?
You know, I mean, honestly, a lot of our advice is still pretty consistent. I mean, even when you look at your 401k or even Roth IRAs, looking at 4 groups of mutual funds, because I'm not a big risk taker when it comes to especially retirement and investing. I'm not big in cryptocurrency. I'm not big in single stocks. So even just mutual funds, which sounds so boring for a lot of people because it's not flashy, it's not exciting. But honestly, it's the tortoise and the hare, in my opinion. And the tortoise wins every single time. And so it's this steady approach to wealth building, but also it has a long track record. You know, the way that we teach people to build wealth, again, it's not sexy and flashy and exciting, but it is consistent. And so whether the market goes up and down, it is a long-term play when you go to invest. And so that's the way I look at it. But again, if you have big purchases you're going to be making, here in the next few years, then that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, I have something that's a little bit safer. High yield savings account right now, I mean, it's 3-4%, which is amazing. So you can take advantage of some of that if you want, but especially when it comes to it.
Yeah. I mean, the 6-month treasury, I mean, it really, again, I think had we not had the whole SVB thing, it might have continued moving higher. I think it's, people are trying to settle this whole thing out right now, but you're right. There are places that you can be that are pretty safe. I'm with you, Rachel. Like, I really am. I say this all the time. Like, I don't care. I don't need to make 60% in my portfolio. I just want to know that my money's safe, that I'm not going to lose anything, that I'm outpacing inflation. Yes, so that's an issue, right? Like, how do you outpace inflation? Because even if you can get 4%, 5% on something that might be really locked in, like on a treasury, if you've got inflation in the 6% range, how do you manage that?
Yeah, well, for your long-term investing, then I would not use the high yield savings account, right? Those are for short-term purchases if you're going to make. But when you look at the market, I think 11.8% is average over the course since it's been there. So I think that there's just something to be said about having a long track record, putting your money in. And for me, it's consistent investing. Even when the market's down, be consistent with your investing. And Warren Buffett has a quote, which I love. He said, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. And greedy is kind of, I don't care for that word, but the idea is like, hey, if people are jumping on the bandwagon of this new thing that's so exciting and so great, I would be cautious. I would. I naturally step back. I'm like, let's see how this all plays out. Cryptocurrency is one example. I mean, there's a lot of examples that you're like, where again, when people are fearful, like in the market, I mean, I was talking to people that wanted to cash out their 401ks. They wanted to pull completely out of the market because it went down, and it was like, no, you stay in. And in my opinion, it's that consistent investing. When they're fearful, you put money in, and your money's going to get you more, obviously, in a down market. So again, it's a long-term play, but fear is a real thing. It is a real thing. And
For
it's
sure.
a terrible financial advisor. Do not make decisions based on fear.
No, for sure. I mean, emotion plays so much into it. And then you look at the headlines, and look, I've worked at the three big financial networks, from CNBC to Bloomberg to Fox Business. And the reality is, look, when you're in a news cycle, you're on the news, and the network is going to be on the news. And so on a down day, all you do is you put your biggest bears on TV, right? And everybody's freaking out.
Yeah.
And then when the market's up, you get all your bulls. And so you kind of go in those waves. And I say the important thing as an investor is you kind of need to be able to see through that. And what I actually do say to people is, try not to watch that. Really? I mean, look, I actually would say don't consume that in that sense, because you will get so fearful. It plays upon your fears, and then you kind of can't see the forest for the trees, right? Because what you're talking about is almost putting it on sort of like automatic pilot. I'm going to save, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yep, you're exactly right. I'm like, you'd have to live in a padded room if you were watching Fox and CNN both all the time. I mean, like, it would drive you crazy. And now we have social media. So your, mother-in-law's putting her economic advice out on Facebook to all her friends, and you're thinking, oh no, so you really want to be careful with what you consume, because it's a lot of fear. And I'll be honest, the world is really hard. I mean, if it's job reports or the housing market or the markets, I mean, there's a lot out there. And again, if that's where you sit and live, you're not going to make great long-term financial decisions.
But I think you said something at the beginning, which is really important and cannot be stressed enough, especially given what we went through with COVID. And you talked about having money set aside, that emergency fund, the liquidity that you need before you start getting into everything else.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because what's hard is if something happens, and it may not be a pandemic, but it could be a job loss. Mm-hmm. It could be an unexpected move that you need to make. I mean, there things happen. And the truth is, things are going to happen. So my big play is, if you have no debt, if you don't owe anyone anything, if your car payment and your student loan and that personal loan and credit card debt, if you don't owe anyone anything and you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in the bank, your life is just different. You sleep different at nights. Your anxiety is lower because you actually have a clear head, because you think, okay, well, if something happens, it's not good. I don't want bad things to happen. But when they do, not if, but when they do, we have the ability to weather that storm. And I think a lot of Americans are not in that position. That's really scary and really sad, honestly, because I've walked through it. A lot of people's stories, even since 2020, when things have happened and shifted, and it absolutely is, it's disastrous. So really get that foundation under you.
Well, it's so important for people's psychology. And there's another component to that, Rachel, too, which I think is hard for some Americans, because, we like to live flashy lifestyles, and, everybody's flexing on Instagram.
This guy's so rich, he has a swimming pool in his swimming pool.
Living within your means so that you can have that good night's sleep.
That's right.
How important is that for people to focus on?
It's huge. It's really interesting. I've been doing some research of just that, about the mental wellness of someone and their financial wellness, and how tied together they are, because you just make different decisions in life when your stress level isn't up and your anxiety level isn't up. When you have a level of control over your money and over your life, you have autonomy and you're able to make different decisions. And it does something, it gives you power back versus, again, working for the bank or working for Toyota Motor Company, right? And so there's something about that really is powerful. And that's what I encourage people. I'm like, the margin in your budget, it's worth having $725, which is the average car payment right now, in your budget and in the bank just to be there, versus having no money month to month. And if you lose a job, you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. So the new car isn't worth it in my opinion.
No,
night's sleep and having
you're absolutely right. And it's almost like sort of finding almost a religion, right? With yourself, and a comfort level with yourself, so that you're taking control. And
exactly right.
Ultimately, it really does pay off. This is something, though, that Rachel doesn't get really taught in school.
I'll never understand the workings of high finance.
Frankly, we spent a lot of time on a lot of things in school, especially these days, but understanding, say, how to get a mortgage, interest rates, credit cards, why you never want to actually be putting anything right on a credit card, because you're going to be paying 18, 22%,
right,
in extra charges. And I don't know, as kids today, and frankly, the adult population even fully understands this, because we're not, for whatever reason, servicing that in school. We don't, home economics, you get to bake some dynamite chocolate chip cookies, but you're not actually learning home economics.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And even how to create a zero-based budget for the month. Like that's not being taught. So we are seeing some states that are actually mandating financial literacy as a credit for high school. I think Michigan is one of those states. I think Florida is. So there's a few states that are doing that, which is fantastic. And at Ramsey Solutions, we actually have a high school curriculum, and we graduated our 6 millionth student last year that has gone through the curriculum. But it's a huge part of my story, because growing up in a home where money was talked about, I was given that gift of financial literacy from an early age. And my parents weren't all nerdy. We didn't have like mutual fund birthday parties growing up. Like it wasn't crazy, but it was enough where it was like, okay, I understand the dangers of things around money, and I understand what I should be proactive in. And
what did your dad used to tell you? I mean, what were some of his big lessons?
Well, when we were really little, for instance, like we were never given an allowance. We were always on commission. So you work, you get paid. You don't work, you don't get paid. So understanding that money comes from work, doesn't just come from mom and dad. That was a big lesson very early on. And then honestly, it was really simple. I mean, especially as kids, we had 3 jars. Each of us kids did it. It was give, save, and spend. And when you earned your money for the week, you had to put some in give, you had to put some in save, and some in spend. And it was like you just had to build all 3 of those money muscles, if you will. And then as we got older, as teenagers, we had our own checking account. We had to learn to reconcile a checking account and all of it. So, I mean, rather basic things.
But still new for some people. I mean, really, Rachel, a lot of people don't do it.
Yep. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I would just encourage parents watching, like you are responsible for this part of your child, of your child learning this in order for them to launch into the real world. And you don't have to be perfect with money. Your example is big, more is caught than taught. But some parents feel like they're out of the game because they're struggling with money. They're like, well, Rachel, I am the one living paycheck to paycheck. I am the one that can't cover a $400 emergency. Like, who am I? But
well, I mean, look,
parents.
It's been a passion for your whole family, certainly for your father, for you. You have 2 shows now, right? The Rachel Cruz Show and Smart Money Happy Hour. What's the difference between the 2?
Yeah, so the Rachel Cruz Show, it's on YouTube and podcast, and it's a little bit more educational, I would say. It's still fun. I mean, I still like to bring, who I am to it. So that's once a week. And the Smart Money Happy Hours with another Ramsey personality, George Camel. So we sit down with a cocktail every week, and it's more about kind of what's going on in the world. Yeah, I know. It's what's going on in the world. So pop culture, current events, and money, and we have fun. It's more of a lighter, enjoyable podcast. I think it's an easier pill to swallow if you're not used to money podcasts, but it's been really fun.
It is such a pleasure to talk with you today, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining the program. I encourage people to check out the book, Know Yourself, Know Your Money. Watch her on the Rachel Cruz Show and Smart Money Happy Hour. Cheers to that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I so appreciate it.